The first letter arrived in a pale gray envelope, thin as old skin and sealed without return address, slipped through the mail slot during a night when Nathan swore he hadn't slept, only laid in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator as it buzzed in and out of frequency like it too was breathing. The letter, and signed and typed on an old ribbon typewriter judging by the faint smudges of ink, simply read, "You forgot something and it's waiting." Nathan stared at it for 10 minutes before folding it back into the envelope, placing it on the kitchen table, and trying to forget the strange unease blooming in his chest like mildew. But it came back every night, a new envelope each time, the messages growing more intimate, more accusatory. "You left the window open. It got out." Then, "Don't pretend you didn't hear the scratching." On the fifth night, he set up his phone to record the hallway overnight, but the footage showed nothing, no footsteps, no shadow, just a brief flicker at 3:17 a.m., when the bulb in the hall dimmed as if something passed by, barely visible, like a figure beneath water. The next letter read, "Looking won't help. You already let it in." Nathan stopped going to work, stopped showering, just sat with the letters, obsessively sorting them, cataloging the ink smudges, the creases, the smell, an odd metallic odor like cold coins or old blood. The more he read them, the more certain he became that they weren't written by anyone but himself. The language was too familiar, the rhythm too close to his own anxious thoughts, like someone had transcribed the monologue from his mind. He called his sister Mira to come over, needing someone to say something sane, but when she arrived she stopped in the doorway, visibly disturbed by the stacks of paper and the smell, telling him he needed air, sleep, a doctor, something. She read the letters, frowning, asking when he'd started writing them. "I didn't," he said, and she just looked at him with that mix of fear and pity people reserve for the newly insane. That night, she stayed over, and in the morning she was gone, her car still outside, her shoes by the door, her phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked, a single open message thread with no replies, just messages from Nathan he swore he never sent. "Are you awake? Come down to the basement. I found it." He didn't have a basement. Nathan stood in the kitchen staring at the message thread for so long the light changed in the room without him noticing, until the shadows lengthened across the linoleum like ink spilled deliberately into the shape of teeth. And still there was no Mira, no sign she had ever actually arrived, aside from her shoes and her phone and a single strand of long hair caught on the couch cushion, which he wrapped carefully around his finger like a thread that could lead him out of whatever strange labyrinth his life had become, but it only made the ache in his stomach worse, the feeling that something terrible had already happened and no one, not even he, remembered it properly, as though the memory had been edited just enough to prevent discovery. He began searching the apartment more thoroughly, knocking on the thin drywall, listening for hollow sounds, finding nothing unusual until he slid the fridge away from the wall and found a gap behind it, not large but deep, and when he shone a flashlight into it, he saw the edge of something, cardboard maybe or old plaster. But when he reached in, his hand brushed something warm, something that moved. He jerked back, heart rattling against his ribs like a trapped thing, and the light flickered out in his hand. When it came back on, the gap was empty again, just dust and a dark smear on the floor like a finger dragged through soot. He slept on the couch that night, the bedroom feeling wrong somehow, smaller than it should have been. The walls too close together, the air too still, and every time he closed his eyes he saw the messages again, not just on Myra's phone now but on his own arms, written in faint purple ink that rose beneath the skin like veins. In the morning, the hallway outside his door smelled different, like earth and copper, and the apartment across the hall, which had always been empty, now had a new doormat with the word return scratched into the fibers as if with broken glass. He knocked, unsure why, and when no one answered, he pressed his ear to the wood and heard humming, soft and childlike, repeating a slow three-note lullaby that made his teeth hurt. That night the knocking started, not at the door but from inside the walls, starting near the floor and slowly climbing, like something crawling vertically through the drywall, patient, testing, until it reached just behind his headboard and then stopped. In the morning, a letter had been slipped under the pillow beside him, even though he had not slept there, even though the bedroom door had remained shut, and this one said, "You are feeding it every time you remember," and he felt something inside him falter, as if the very act of knowing had given it strength, and then he saw his reflection in the black screen of the TV and for a moment his mouth was still, but the reflection's lips were moving. He threw a blanket over the screen and paced, trying to think, trying to trace things back to when it started, but the memories had grown thin, like photocopies of photocopies, and his childhood felt suspiciously quiet in his head, as though something had gone missing there long ago. Digging through his closet, he found an old box of family photos and flipped through them rapidly until he reached one that froze him. An image of himself as a boy, maybe 6 or 7, sitting cross-legged on a rug in an unfamiliar house. his face smudged as if someone had rubbed it with a damp thumb, and behind him a dark hallway that seemed too deep, too narrow, and barely visible in the shadows, a thin shape, pale and crooked, not quite facing the camera, not quite looking away. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Don't forget what you let in," and Nathan dropped the photo as if burned, noticing for the first time that his hands were trembling, the tremble of someone not just afraid but beginning to disintegrate piece by piece, like old tape peeling from the wall. Nathan didn't eat that day or the next, unsure if hunger was even the correct sensation anymore, because his body felt different now, heavier in places, lighter in others, as if he were being subtly rewritten, bone by bone, thought by thought, and the apartment itself had begun to respond to him, the lights flickering not randomly but in rhythm to his movements, and the pipes groaning in short, breath-like bursts whenever he approached the kitchen sink, which now dripped red-brown water that smelled faintly like vinegar and something older, something ferrous. He stopped checking his phone after a while because every time he did there were new drafts of text messages he hadn't written, all beginning the same way, "I'm almost ready to come back," followed by coordinates that changed each time, yet always pointed to the same result when entered online. A stretch of forest outside the city, long since cleared, but once home to a psychiatric hospital that had burned down in 1963 with only a single survivor, a 7-year-old boy who claimed he'd been living in the basement of the hospital for months before the fire, though no one could explain how he'd gotten there or why his eyes were entirely black, not just the pupils but the entire sclera, as if something had been wearing him like a glove and abandoned him at the last moment. Nathan found this article on the third day and recognized the boy's face immediately, not just as familiar but as his own, his younger face, unedited by time, staring up from the screen with lips slightly parted as if whispering something only the image could hear, and at that moment a sound came from the hallway closet, low and deliberate, like a single knuckle rapping against the inside of the door. He didn't move at first, barely breathed, but the knock came again, then a third time, followed by the unmistakable sound of the door unlatching from within, not quickly but slowly, as though whatever was inside was patient and didn't need to rush anymore. Nathan backed away but his legs felt foreign, rubbery, as if they too had received instructions he wasn't privy to, and when the door creaked open, he saw nothing inside. No coats, no shelves, just a descending stairwell he knew hadn't been there the day before, lined with wet concrete and a string of buzzing bulbs that led downward into a space that pulsed faintly with heat and sound, a hum just below hearing, like insects communicating through walls. He descended, of course he did, each step feeling longer than the last, gravity pressing on his shoulders like invisible hands guiding him downward, until he reached a corridor made of stone, lined with mirrors that reflected not his body but pieces of it, an eye here, a hand there, and sometimes an unfamiliar smile curling in one corner of the glass while his own face remained still. At the end of the corridor was a room, small and square, with a single chair in the middle and a man already sitting in it, back to Nathan, shoulders hunched, hair thin and greasy, and as Nathan approached, the man turned and revealed his own face, aged and ruined, skin pocked and sagging, but the eyes were the same, exactly the same, and the mouth opened to speak but produced only the sound of scraping, like a chair being dragged across a wooden floor upstairs. Nathan screamed then, he thinks, or tried to, but the sound didn't come out, only poured inward, back into his lungs like smoke, and the room began to pulse like a heartbeat, and he was no longer sure if he was standing or sitting, watching or being watched, and he remembered something the letters had once said, "There is no returning, only remembering," and then everything slowed, like a sinking, and he understood, finally and terribly, that he had never really left the basement of that hospital, not entirely, not cleanly, that something had followed him out, something small and hungry that had grown in the dark corners of his mind, fed on neglect and doubt and silence, and now it had him again, fully, joyously, like an old friend welcoming him home, and as the walls closed in, not with malice but with purpose, he saw the mirrors blink out one by one, not shattering but sealing, like eyes closing in sleep, until only one reflection remained. His younger self, standing in the hallway of an apartment that did not exist, holding a letter that had not yet been sent, smiling.